Welcome to the Language, Thought and Communication unit. In this video, we'll cover the relationship between language and thought, human and animal communication, and non-verbal communication. I've updated the PsychBoost app. Now it has over 500 GCSE flashcards, over 400 multiple choice quiz questions, and over 300 key terms to test your knowledge with. Of course, all based on the information I cover in these videos. I'm so confident you'll like my app. You can use all the features for Paper 1 for free. Only subscribe to Paper 2 if you know you'll find it helpful. You can also follow along with these videos by completing my worksheets, available on Patreon. The relationship between language and thought. In this video, we're going to be considering two competing theories about the relationship between language and the thoughts that language represents. And it's an interesting chicken and egg question. Do I actually know what an object or idea is if I don't have the word for it? Or on the other hand, can I actually use a word properly without knowing what the concept it's based on? So faced with that problem, what comes first, the ideas or the words? So to help us unpack this problem, let's start with Piaget, who might have had what seems at first to be the more common sense perspective. Piaget thinks that before being able to use a word, we need to develop a mental concept of what that thing is, a schema. When that child has developed their schema, they can then use that knowledge to express their thoughts with language. We've used the word schema before, but as a reminder, a schema is a mental package of information we have about concepts, and we build those schemas together through experience. Piaget suggests that the use of language in certain ways is only possible for children when they've reached a certain stage of cognitive development. If you've already watched my video on Piaget's stages of development, you should already be familiar with the names of these stages. The first stage of language development is the sensorimotor stage. Babies in this stage are first learning how to use their bodies, and this includes vocalizations and imitating sounds. At the pre-operational stage, children voice their thoughts in a basic way, but struggle to communicate effectively with language. At the concrete operational stage, children can now use language well, but only to talk about physical objects. At the formal operational stage, children can talk about abstract ideas and logic. So, one of the main advantages of Piaget's theory is it has face validity. It seems to match what most people's experience of how children develop language. But there isn't much evidence in support of Piaget's ideas on language. Part of the problem is studying internal mental processes like schema development in relation to language is difficult to do objectively, especially as babies are participants who can't self-report. And the alternate Sapir-Whorf hypothesis has more experimental evidence, suggesting how we think and perceive depends on language. So what is a Sapir-Whorf hypothesis? Well, this suggests that in order to be able to think about a concept, we need to be able to express it in words. It follows that if a culture doesn't have a word for an idea or object, they can't understand the concept in the same way as a culture that does have the word. Now, this idea is called linguistic determinism, that the structure of our language shapes how we think. And it has two varieties. What I've suggested is a hard version, that without the words, I can't even think about the idea that the word represents. And there's the soft version, that the range of words I have for objects changes our perception of them. Okay, this is getting a little complicated. I'm going to give you some examples to show you what I mean. If you live in the Solomon Islands, you would have 9 words for coconut. In the Philippines, there are 92 words for rice. It's likely that coconuts and rice form a much bigger part of the lives of the people who live in those societies than yours. Could the extra words help the people who speak those languages experience coconuts and rice differently to you? A more extreme example is the number of words Inuit have for snow. The exact number is contested, but a study in 2006 identified over 1,000 words relating to snow, ice, freezing, and melting in the Sami language. Surely with such a range of ways to talk about snow, the Sami people must have a very different perception of reality when it comes to snow. We're going to now look at research that suggests that, yes, the recall of events and the recognition of colour seems to be influenced by the language you speak, supporting the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. Sapir and Whorf were both influenced by Native American language, so we're going to focus on the Native Americans, but I'm also going to give an example of the effect in another culture. So, starting with events. If the use of different words in our language changes our perception, then it should change how we interpret events. Whorf studied the language of a Native American group called the Hopi. The Hopi language didn't seem to have the normal concept of time, so no words for past, present, and future. Whorf suggested that without these words, the Hopi people didn't experience time and were timeless. Now, this original work has been heavily criticised, with later work showing that even though the Hopi language is unusual, they do have ways to talk about events being related to time. But research between Spanish and English speakers found that the languages have a very different way of speaking about accidents. English speakers would say, he broke the vase, while Spanish speakers would say, the vase broke. Now, the researchers found in recall, English speakers were more likely to remember who broke the vase, but not that it was an accident. And Spanish speakers were more likely to recall it being an accident, but not who broke it. Now, this suggests that the perception of the same incident changed depending on the language that was used. It's an interesting finding with implications for things like eyewitness testimony. We've looked at the recall of events, let's finish the video with recognition of colours. Now, there's a very interesting range of research about the development of colour words in language and what that tells us about perception. And the research in this field has been argued all over the decades. I'm only going to mention a little bit here because I'm trying to keep these videos to just what you need for your GCSE. But in the comments of this video and on my website, I'm going to share a link to a really interesting video by Vox. All humans have colour vision, but the colours we perceive are part of a wide spectrum. How we divide the spectrum shows how we perceive colours as separate from one another. So variations in language in relation to colour suggests variations in perception. It was noticed in old Greek stories the word blue was never used. It was suggested that, without the word, the ancient Greeks had no perception of blue. Later researchers working studying the Zuni people found they didn't have separate words for orange and yellow, and had difficulty telling the difference between them compared to English speakers. This finding of the Native Americans is supported by research on native Russian speakers, who have two words for different shades of blue. The research showed that the Russian speakers could perceive differences between the shades of blue faster than the English speakers, suggesting they have different perception of blue. However, researchers looking at the development of language around the world shows that most languages develop the same colour words in a set order. This suggests there is a shared colour perception between people of all cultures. Here are 3 additional evaluations for the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. Well, one practical application is the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis can be used to explain the cognitive underperformance of poorer students. This is due to them lacking a complex vocabulary, also known as an elaborated code. This knowledge can inform teachers in designing classes that improve vocabulary to help children with general understanding of the world. And while there might be many differences in the number of words for objects or ideas in different languages, the way these languages are used might make any difference in perception limited. For example, the word snow in English can be used with descriptive words that add meanings such as soft, powdery, and wet. And the practical differences between most languages is limited. Movies are often translated between many languages without changing the meaning of the script. Human and animal communication. Let's start by considering the communication abilities of animals. Now, in comparison to complex human language, observation of animals suggests they can only communicate on a limited number of areas. All we should consider are survival, reproduction, territory, and food. Now, starting with survival. Animals that live in groups and are preyed on tend to have an alarm call that can warn other members of its group that they've spotted a predator. Meerkats actually have a range of calls they will make depending on the type of predator. So, if it's an eagle in the air or a jackal on the ground. The alarm call will also vary depending on the distance the predator is from the group. Meerkats will also use body language to indicate the direction of the threat. Communicating reproduction is important, as many female animals can only get pregnant at certain times of the year. This can be communicated to males by the use of pheromones, so these are chemical signals that males can smell. Female animals can also use body language to display fertility. Males will also communicate reproductive fitness with body language and courtship rituals. Animals will often fight to protect their territory, But to avoid that conflict, they can use scent signals to mark territory so other members of its species can avoid the area. Some predators hunt for food in packs and coordinate their attacks with sound. Examples are wolves and killer whales. Honeybees use a waggle dance to show the location of food from the hive. So, while animal communication can be impressive, there are some fundamental differences between human and animal communication. Of course, we can use language to talk about a wide number of topics, not just those linked to survival and reproduction. But it's not just the number of topics, it's how we talk about those topics that's different. While animals communicate in response to the world around them, humans can imagine how the world could be and talk about that. For example, animals might sound an alert about the presence of a predator, but humans can think about what they can do to avoid predators in the future. This ability to plan ahead and then discussing those plans with other humans allows us to predict future events and prepare for them. The complexity of human language also allows communication of abstract concepts, such as justice, culture, and the exchange of goods for currency. Because of the complexity of human spoken language, we rely less on body language and other types of signaling. Many animals have much more complex body movements that communicate status, fertility, and aggression. Now, you might not expect insects to have much of a communication system, but a researcher called von Frisch shared the Nobel Prize for his work on honeybee communication. Von Frisch's aim was to investigate how honeybees communicated the location of food through movement. His method was to construct a glass beehive so he could observe and record the bees' movements. He fed the bees sugar water from locations away from the hive. When the bees visited those locations, he would mark them with paint so they could be identified back at the hive. Von Frisch found that when the bees returned to the hive, their movement patterns were related to the distance the sugar water was from the hive. If the food was less than 100 meters away, the bees would do a round dance. They would turn in a circle from left to right. But if the food was more than 100 meters, the bees would do a waggle dance, moving forwards, waggling their abdomen from side to side. They would then turn the circle to the left, and then they would repeat the movement, but then turn to the right. On the basis of these results, he concluded that the bees communicate using movement to identify the location of food. So let's evaluate von Frisch's bee study. Firstly, and very positively, the bee study has been replicated a number of times, with the same results, showing we can trust the findings. We may criticize the study in lacking validity. The bee's behavior might not have been the same as wild bees that feed from flowers, not sugar water, and the beehive is transparent, which might be a problem, but it's not like the bees know we're watching.
Bee law number 1, absolutely no talking to humans. All right, launch position.
We can actually criticize the study for underestimating bee communication. The role of sound has since been found to be important in bee communication, with researchers recording the noise produced from the bees dancing. And some theories suggest the bees are able to produce cognitive maps, including memories of landmarks. Not bad for a creature with a brain the size of a pinhead. And non-verbal communication. Let's start by defining exactly what we mean by verbal and non-verbal communication. Verbal communication is the use of words to pass on information. Now, of course, we mean when words are spoken, but we also classify written words as verbal communication. And non-verbal communication is basically everything else. Now, obvious examples are facial expressions and body language, but less obvious is non-verbal communication within verbal communication, so the tone and volume of what you say. Just think of all the different ways that you can say sorry, especially when you didn't mean it. Okay, let's go into detail about some common forms of non-verbal communication, starting with eye contact. This is when two people look directly at each other, or avoid looking at each other to pass on social meaning. If you're having a meaningful conversation with someone, you're going to be using eye contact to regulate the flow of that conversation, indicating when the other person is going to respond. The person who's speaking will look away, and the person listening will be looking. Okay, this is what you came for, signaling attraction. Two people flirting will often hold eye contact for an extended period while talking. This indicates an interest in the other person, Eye contact across a crowded room is also a signal in initial attraction. The level of eye contact in combination with other body language signals also indicates to the other person how much emotion they feel, with people appearing more angry, happy, or sad if they hold the eye contact. Body language is how we use the position of our body parts to pass on information, usually about our emotional state. There's a clear distinction between open and closed postures. Open postures show self-confidence. It also indicates that we like the other person. It's relaxed and open with the arms facing towards the other person. A closed posture suggests low self-confidence, disapproving and rejecting the other person. It's tense, crossed arms, hunched, and facing away. Postural echo, also known as mirroring, is when people copy each other's body language. This again is common in people who are flirting, as it demonstrates interest in the other person. And touch. Touch is generally used to indicate affection for the other person, but it can be used to indicate dominance. Another aspect of body language is the distance we place our bodies from another person. We have an area around our bodies that we see as our own personal space, and we expect other people to avoid it. How close we're happy other people getting depends on our relationship with them. Strangers are furthest away, then people we know, and then close relationships the closest physically. If you get into someone's personal space, it can indicate familiarity or intimidation. As we learn personal space from socialization, we find there are significant cultural differences with what's acceptable personal distance around the world. Contact cultures such as South America, the Middle East, and Southern Europe tend to have smaller personal space than non-contact cultures of Northern Europe, North America, and Asia. Gender also plays a role in personal space, with men keeping a larger distance between each other than women keep with other women. Status plays a role. People of a similar social status will be closer together, compared to people of a combination of high and low status who will keep a larger distance between each other. Evaluating non-verbal communication, we can suggest that research in this area is important, especially to help people who struggle to socially communicate with others. Understanding variations in body language between cultures also helps with international business and politics. However, much of the research on body language is open to subjective interpretation. As body language is an unconscious process, it's unlikely that participants are able to accurately self-report on their own body language. How much of body language is instinctual, so from genetics and innate, or how much of body language is learned from socialization, so nurture, is up for debate. There are strong arguments and evidence for body language being a result of genetic inheritance. Researchers point to the body language of newborn babies and sensory-deprived children. These are participants who have not been able to visually observe and imitate the body language of others. So any body language they display must be instinctual. So if we look at neonates, so newborn babies, we can see a pre-cry expression of sadness, as well as showing what we would recognize as smiling, surprise, and disgust. As babies show these expressions before seeing them modeled, this suggests that the expressions are innate. We have the genes to smile from birth. The same expressive behavior is found in studies of children born sensory deprived. If facial expressions were learned through imitation, these children who can't see shouldn't be able to use the same facial expressions in the same way as other children. But problems in research in this area are potential researcher bias, with researchers interpreting babies' body language in a way that supports their theories, and counter-evidence of cross-cultural differences in body language, suggesting that body language is learned, not inherited. And while it's likely that some aspects of body language are innate, a better explanation of body language is that we're born with some innate body language traits, but these adapt in response to experience, which is an interactionalist approach. So the counter to body language being inherited is the idea that body language is learned. Our body language develops due to observing other people's body language and observing people's responses to our body language and then adapting. Strengths of body language being learned are the fact that body language varies from person to person. Some people invade your personal space, some people use too much eye contact and touch, and also we all vary our body language significantly depending on the social context, all suggesting a learnt behaviour. There's also cross-cultural research that we're about to talk about showing people use body language differently around the world. But criticisms of body language being learned is the evidence from babies using body language in early life, and the possibility of an interactionist approach explaining body language better than learning alone. So, we do have a research study on body language to consider. The study is by a researcher called Yuki, who was interested in the differences between the emoji used by his Japanese and American friends. In preparation for this video, I found some examples of Japanese text emoji. They're amazing. There's literally thousands of them. They're so expressive. It just puts a smiley face to shame. Go Google it. What Yuki found so interesting about these Japanese emoji was a focus on the eyes. Western emoji tend to have more of an emphasis on the mouth. So Yuki set up a study that investigated cultural differences in the interpretation of emotion in emojis. The method was presenting Japanese and Americans with a range of emoticons. These had been specially developed to have combinations of eyes and mouths that were either sad, neutral, or happy. The participants had to rate each face on the scale of 1 to 9. Yuki found the Americans rated the emoticons with the happy mouths as the happiest, but the Japanese rated the emoticons with the happy eyes as the happiest. The same was found with sadness, the Americans rating the emoticons with the sad mouths as most unhappy, and the Japanese rating the ones with the happy eyes as the saddest. So from these results, Yuki concluded Japanese and Americans have different interpretations of the same facial expressions, with Americans focusing more on the mouths and Japanese the eyes when interpreting emotion. When evaluating Yuki, we can see that the research showing cross-cultural variations perceiving body language matches other research showing cultural variations in perception. But to criticize Yuki's study, we could argue it lacks validity. The study didn't use real human faces that we're more used to interpreting than emoji. Human faces are more complex, and often when interpreting emotion in real life, we see faces moving. Also, the emotional range was limited. There may only be cultural variation interpreting happy and sad faces. Maybe for other emotions, Japanese and Americans look at the same facial features. We also need to consider the possibility of demand characteristics. The participants were aware they were taking part in a lab study, or might have guessed the aims of the study and altered their behaviour. So to finish on body language, we'll consider why we've evolved to have body language at all. Of course, in any discussion of evolution, we should start with Darwin, the 19th century naturalist who argued that traits that help with survival are selected for and then passed on to the next generation. Now, often when thinking of evolution, we think of physical traits, but psychological traits are also evolved. If we observe animal behaviour, we see a range of non-verbal behaviour that's common across a species. Examples are courtship rituals in birds and dominance displays in primates. If you raise a social primate in isolation and then show it pictures of primates showing threatening body language, the primate will respond to the image. So we would conclude that animals have evolved an instinctive knowledge of body language. Evolved traits are adaptive, so non-verbal communication has to in some way help a creature survive. We can use a wide range of animal examples, but even just with humans, babies show a wide range of body language that is designed to trigger caretaking behaviour in adults, helping their survival. So if we need to evaluate the evolutionary perspective in non-verbal communication, we can support it with evidence of human body language from birth. But we can also question the universality of body language between humans. If body language isn't universal among humans, it's not evolved, but learned. I want to thank all my patrons for their support. They allow me to work part-time and make PsychBoost. And in return, they get extra resources. For example, GCSE patrons get digital worksheets, exam question walkthroughs, and these videos as a set of teaching slides.